Hello, my friends. Welcome to another live. We'll get Cian on here in a second. Got a lot of good questions, lots and lots of questions from the Discord. We'll just kind of jump around and see what happens. How's everybody's week going thus far? Yeah, I'm passing through New York for like 24 hours on my way to the next thing. And trying to get in these lives. I'm obviously not in a recording studio at the moment, at my friend's apartment. And just got to get it in. What's up? Yo, what's going on? I just texted Cian. He should be ready here. He's probably been celebrating his Grammy win for the last 3 weeks. So we'll see how he's feeling. We'll talk about that, of course. What's up, everybody? Oh, there's Cian.
Hello.
What's up, buddy? Can you hear me?
I can. Hello, your friends.
Hello, my friends, your friends, all of our friends. How you doing, man?
I'm good, dude. How are you? Where are you?
I'm currently in New York, just for about 24 hours on my way to Mexico and then probably London. And I'm actually figuring that all out today, but was in North Carolina at my cousin's, not wedding, but wedding celebration, because she got married during COVID. So I think, like many of us, I have a wedding every like 5 weeks for the next 6 months. Everybody catching up. Yeah, man. How
Awesome.
you doing? How's LA?
LA is great. A little gloomy at the moment, but it's good. I'm headed to Texas tomorrow to visit some family, so excited to travel. Traveling with the child is a whole new adventure.
Yeah, how much time are you taking off?
Just like 5 or 6 days. It's my wife's spring break, so we're trying to make the most of it. But yeah, just I'm still like post the virus, not that we're post it, whatever, but it's still exciting to fly and go places. Like I feel excited. It could be anywhere, and I'm just like, let's fucking go. I want to go somewhere.
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, Texas and many parts of the South don't seem to have much of the virus in their consciousness, so you'll get to experience a little more regular life.
Absolutely. Yeah, back to normal there. It's been that way pretty much since the beginning, I believe.
Well, since we last spoke, and you know it's coming, you went from Grammy-nominated, Grammy-losing mix engineer, producer, drummer, dear friend of mine, to Grammy-winning. I love your website change where you crossed out losing and wrote winning. Congratulations. How are you feeling? Does it feel like a big thing? Tell us about it.
What a ride it was. I mean, having gone through a little bit of this cycle like 8 years ago for a record I had far less involvement in, it was definitely different this time around. It was like, I think the lead up to it was a little bit more nerves, in the sense that I genuinely thought that we could win. Like before, it was like in the first time for the Nickel Creek record that I worked on with Eric, I worked on that record, but I didn't have a real sense of ownership over it, or a sense of pride in the same way that I do with this one. And I think going into this, it was like, fuck, like I'm a little nervous. And Sunday, the day of the Grammys, I was definitely like a bag of nerves. I tried to watch, the category that I was in, the alternative category, is not like on the prime time thing. So they have this daytime ceremony, which I'd never tried to watch before, but they streamed it. And I was like, cool, like, we'll sit down, we'll watch it. This thing was like fucking 4 hours long. And we got like 2.5 hours in, and my daughter was just like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, can we not? This is really dumb.
Your 2-year-old's like, Dad, can we just go like play with some blocks or something? This is boring as shit.
Oh my God. And so I was just like, honestly, I didn't feel this way until the day. And I was like, man, I just feel apprehensive. I just kind of want to know, I want to know if we win or lose. Like, I don't really care. I just want it to be over, And so I went out and I took Lila out, my daughter, on her scooter, and we just like walked around the neighborhood. Ended up getting a FaceTime from Emma, my wife. It was like, you won. And it was just like kind of the best way to find out, to just be like out with my kid. And then it was super fun. It was a little overwhelming to kind of just hear from everyone all at once, from all walks of life, whether it's music community people, family, you know, all over the world. It was just like, you know, half the day was just spent trying to, you know, be thankful and say hi to people and all of that stuff. And it was just fun. It was super celebratory. It felt like I feel proud of it. It was the record to beat, you know, like I went in, listened to the other records like the previous week, like start to finish, to just be like, hey, what's the real deal here? What are we up against? And I just felt like we should win this fucking Grammy. And we did. So it was cool. It was fucking awesome. An experience I hope everyone gets to enjoy sometime. But I feel great about it. It's still kind of like every time it gets brought up, it's still like exciting.
It's pretty cool. Well, it's well deserved. And so with the Nickel Creek album that you were nominated for, you were an engineer, and as you and I both know, and many other people have discovered in the last 5 or 8 years with Eric going on YouTube and sharing lots of things, Eric Valentine albums are really Eric Valentine albums in the best way, where he really spearheads things. And you know, I engineered a couple things. You I think were more involved in engineering projects with him. But you feel like this one, which is what, so on this is the St. Vincent album, best alternative album. You mixed it, you played some drums. Did you record things as well? What was your
Yeah,
actual involvement in all of it?
the recording of the record was kind of, you know, it started, you know, the summer before COVID. And it was interesting because we started kind of recording material for this album before I had Lila. So kind of we had this run of work where I was working with Annie, and we scored a movie, and we just spent a lot of time recording stuff. And
what was the movie?
The movie is a movie that she did with Carrie Brownstein called The Nowhere Inn. It was basically kind of like this, you know, this dark humor parody of St. Vincent playing herself. And it was super fun. And, you know, it was the first time like really digging in on a movie score, and just the two of us like just making noise. And so in that process, there were like times where ideas would come, and they were like, oh, this is like more song, you know, type vibe, less like cue for a movie. And so it was, you know, just me and her in her studio, and there'd be a lot of opportunities where we would just kind of jam on ideas, you know, like she would play guitar or bass or something else, or even if like we got some sort of synth modular thing down, be like, you know, you can only kind of program so much, or especially with my skill set, like I'm a rudimentary drum programmer, and like even though I'm not the best drummer, it's a lot easier for me to just like get behind a drum set and just kind of execute whatever ideas are in my head. And so that was the case with a couple of those songs where I was just around for the genesis,
So you were actually jamming together. You were playing drums and she would play guitar.
For a lot of them, yeah. And then there were two. The first song on the record is the song "Pay Your Way in Pain," and that's this kind of very hooky, Eurythmicsy, like modular thing that she came up with. And in that case, that was just me. Like she was just driving Pro Tools, and I was just playing drums and hacking out ideas. And you know, and eventually, what happened was we recorded a couple songs, or at least the beginnings of a couple songs. And then she went and linked up with Jack Antonoff in New York, and his engineer Laura Sisk. Congratulations to them also. And then they basically finished the record at Electric Ladyland, or at least all of the instrumentation. And you know, this was kind of like during COVID, so they were, you know, this is probably like April, May 2020. So you know, it was just a tight group, and I think, you know, Jack ended up playing a lot of the instruments on the record as well. And you know, so I think a little bit out of necessity, just because, you know, that was the vibe in early 2020. Yeah. But then also, I think it was just fun for them to like just kind of keep a tight group, and just like, you know, put it all together. And so there were just a couple of instances where the drums just kind of got baked into the production. You know, it wasn't like I got hired to play drums on the song. It was just like I was around, and it's cool. The best idea wins, you know. And I props to Jack and Annie for, you know, just not allowing my drums to stay in there, you know, which is fucking fun. So then, you know, they basically finished it. Annie did most of the vocals herself at home. And then we just kind of jumped right into mixing. It was just kind of like, it all happened very, very quickly. You know, by the time they were finishing production, we were just like mixing. And, you know, the mixing was challenging because, again, this is the era of COVID where we, you know, me and my wife were taking things very seriously. So there there was just no in-person anything. And that was tough. I think like it would have been a lot more fun to be in a room together to kind of like, because anyone that's listened to the record, it's definitely it's a vibe, right? A lot of the sonics and stuff are like big, moving, swirling, like just lots of kind of real committed aesthetics that were a little tough to do remotely. So it was a lot of revisions, not in the sense of a normal revision where it's like, hey, can you turn this up or down? It was like, this isn't right, let's try something else.
You're trying things. Yeah.
And it was cool. She was super into letting me try stuff, and again, best idea wins, no egos. Jack, same thing. Like, he would have his thoughts. He had kind of really executed everything that he could, and so he left us with a lot to work with. And then it just came together, got through the revision process, and and then had a record.
Did you? I know you've been working with Annie with St. Vincent for a number of years. Did you have any hand in helping her figure out or set up gear to record herself? Were you involved at that? Like, what mics, what the chain is, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we had kind of done, the trajectory with Annie was pretty cool in the sense we met on the Slater-Kinney record that we did the previous year, and
she produced.
So she produced it. I ended up engineering it, and we kind of built a rapport from there. And it just kind of like, as soon as we finished that record, she was like, "Do you want to keep working on stuff?" Because she's just constantly either producing other stuff or writing stuff for movies or working on her own stuff. Like, she's definitely a musical engine and just kind of constantly creating. So it was just fun because, I would just go up to her house and like, we would just do stuff. And a lot of what especially the past year has been, she's really gotten into wanting to be an engineer. Like, she wants to understand the process. And she's always been an engineer. She's always recorded her own stuff. She's always kind of been heavy-handed in that process. But I think in this record, especially kind of going into this aesthetic of like the kind of early 70s, she realized that, the gear and the method of recording has a lot more to do with that sound. And so she just kind of dug in, and it's been a lot of like me just teaching her what I know, like lending her gear, helping her shepherd her, like, okay, if you want to buy a vintage microphone, we got her an RCA 77 that she sang a lot of the vocals into. So yeah, it was a lot of like, not hand holding, but just like, she'd be like, hey, what would you try on this? And I'd be like, I would try this through this through this compressor. And then we'd go from there. They'd be back and forth. She'd send me files. It'd be like, maybe on this song, do something a little brighter or something like that. Like, there was a lot of back and forth. And now
you did that before COVID hit, but then once COVID hit, you had already set up enough things with her. And obviously she's a very capable engineer. You have a lot of expertise. You would set up various vocal chains and things that could work well for her.
Totally. Yeah. And it just kind of evolved, even like during COVID, even though we hadn't seen each other for a year, there was just constant communication, FaceTime, of just like, she was just there in her studio, and I had enough of a sense of it at that point, having worked there, that I knew I was like, okay, use this, like plug into that. It's there on the patch bay. I was able to kind of like be there in spirit, and it worked out. It worked out really well.
Yeah, it definitely did. I a couple of thoughts, a couple of ways to talk about this. By the way, the Discord love for you is incredible. Lots of good questions, lots of ridiculous questions about your mustache and your handsomeness and all these other things from people. So lot of love for you. I know it's always appreciated how much time you spend on the Discord showing love to people, and the fact that you get rewarded by the Recording Academy. I think a lot of people are very psyched to have you.
I think that's the real reason I won, honestly.
Well, that was one of the questions from the Discord, and it's a very broad question, and we can kind of wax poetic on it. I think it was Frankie on the Discord asked, what do you think is the skill or attribute most responsible for winning a Grammy? Obviously lots of ways to break that down. Have you been reflecting on it, of like, what does it mean to win a Grammy? Does it mean something different? Obviously you said that if you'd won 8 years ago, it would have felt great, but it's like, cool, I got to do some engineering with Eric Valentine on one of his projects, whereas this one, you really spearheaded it. Do you have thoughts about the Recording Academy, what a Grammy means, how you've gotten to this place, you know,
Yeah.
thoughts generally?
No one cares about the Grammys till they're nominated. And then it's, you know, it's one of those things. I thought about this a lot. I had a good friend, my friend Michael Harris, who's a great engineer in town. He won years ago, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, for a record, the Vampire Weekend record that he helped record. And I remember talking to him, just being like, how's it feel? And he kind of felt very similar to like how I feel, where it's like I don't know if I deserve, you know, there's like that, I don't know if I should really get a Grammy for this, you know? And so he ended up winning, and his dad was a television producer, and he was talking to his dad, and his dad had won Emmys, or, you know, for like production stuff and technical stuff. And his dad had a great point, which was that you're not winning for just that record. You know, you're winning for your body of work up until that point. Like, and if you look at it through that lens, even though with this particular record, I'm proud of it, and I'm stoked on it, and I think it was a great record. It just feels healthier to look at it through that lens, where it's like, cool, this is the 15, 20 years of hard work. And now there's the kind of this milestone to show for it, you know? So that's how I feel about it. Like, it's like, cool. It's a great metric to have under my belt. I don't know how it'll pan out professionally. You know, I think there's a lot of people who think that, like,
Does the price
work
go
just
up?
rains in. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out, you know. So I don't know. You know, but it's certainly, I think that the biggest thing it gives me is just like confidence to know that, like, okay, I can go into any room and know that I can compete, you know, at the highest level. And I kind of felt that, like, before, like when I was in a room with other engineers, like I just feel confident, I know what I'm doing. But now it's like, okay, now there's a trophy to show that, you know, and I can forget about it. I don't have to think about it anymore. Like, however nervous I felt about winning a Grammy, or whatever thought I put into it, like, that's just now out of my head, and I can kind of just get on with my life, get on with my career, and just work on records. And if I get nominated again, great. But like, I think this is like that thing where it's a hump that you get over. And personally, for my own self-confidence, has just been a great boost, and a great solidifier of my work in this industry thus far, you know, in my career.
There were some questions about that topic, about confidence, about imposter syndrome, about those feelings. You said that even going into this, that you didn't feel like maybe you deserved it in some way? That's what you're referring to, this album?
Totally, yeah. I mean, just like, even from when Annie asked me to mix it, I was nervous, because again, like, it was like, oh man, this is an opportunity. Like, I've mixed records before, but never like something like this, where it felt really close to the chest, in the sense that I'm a fan of her music. I helped shepherd it, but it's also like, it's really in the lane that I want to be operating in musically. So it just felt like, fuck, this is a real opportunity. And yeah, like, she could have hired anyone to, you know, Tom Elmhurst mixed her previous record, you know, so it's like, it was great that she had that confidence in me, and that it worked out. But up until I was delivering masters, I felt that I didn't know what I was doing. You know, like, I don't think the imposter syndrome ever goes away when you're kind of operating slightly outside your comfort zone, which is kind of when you operate the best. I think you're always doing your best work when you're a little bit nervous, slightly unprepared, you know, just like, I
totally
agree. On your toes. And
I
think
totally
imposter
agree.
syndrome, I think, serves you well a little bit. You know, it keeps you in check. The last thing you want to do is to not have imposter syndrome, and to just have fucking ego. And I don't think that solicits your best work. I don't think it makes you a great person to work with. So I think imposter syndrome is kind of it's a healthy thing to have in this line of work, or at least a little bit of it. You know, you don't want to be a total, like, melting puddle of, you know, indecisiveness, but you know, you gotta have a little bit of that.
Well, it makes me think of what I think is, in my humble opinion, the most underrated Live with Matt Rad, which is the one with Peter Asher. So for people who have only tuned in the last couple of months or something, go watch that full episode with Peter Asher. And we talk about this, and he at 77, he's had #1 songs as an artist. He's managed huge hit artists. He's won Grammy for Producer of the Year twice, like 15 years apart. And he still has imposter syndrome in the middle of a record. It's like, don't really know what I'm doing. Don't know where this is going to end up. And he's been doing it for longer than any of us can imagine doing it successfully. So I think that's absolutely right, that imposter syndrome doesn't go away, and there's a benefit to feeling out of your comfort zone, and like you said, and not really knowing what you're doing. I mean, again, I've said this before in these lives, but that's part of the reason that I'm nomadic right now, is because I just felt like I was getting a little comfortable in the same space with the same gear, doing the same things. And now I'm running around and it's a little bit stressful, but I think I'm making great records because of it. That sometimes putting yourself in a position where you don't know what you're doing is how you are going to find new things to do. So it's good to hear that. I assume even after this, I don't know how much has worn off of the initial excitement, but I'm sure you'll put yourself in more positions to freak yourself out and see what you can get into.
Yeah, I mean, fuck, why not? At this point.
Well, there's lots of good questions. We could get into some. Let's see if we can get into some sort of like larger concept stuff, and then maybe we can dig into particular things.
Sure.
There were, well, actually, I like this question. Ricardo asked this, and I talked so much to John and then a few other guys. It'd be cool to kind of like rattle off some of the usual questions to you and see what your perspective is. Ricardo asked this question: what do you consider a well-recorded vocal, either when you get sessions or when you record it yourself? I think a lot of mix engineers, here, there's obviously been lots of discussion from some of the John comments about compression and, how people are receiving vocals. I think a lot of people that are earlier in their career are getting much worse quality vocals. How do you think about that? What do you like to hear in a vocal? What do you think about a well-recorded vocal?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's fewer and further between these days. And I think the skill of recording vocal has gotten kind of moved from the engineering thing, which is like picking a microphone, a signal chain, processing that in a way, to thinking more about the processing and kind of like leading with that. And whether that's auto-tune or distortion or effects or something like that, and so what is a good quality vocal for me is like when it shows up like raw, when I have an option of it's just a voice into a microphone with a little bit of EQ and compression, but it sounds like a voice, it sounds human. That's something I struggle with, where especially now everyone has like a UAD setup, right, where they've got this unison technology. I understand the idea behind it, where you've got the signal chain as if you were in a real studio and you had Neve 1073s and 1176s and all this stuff. But I think people are overcooking that stuff into the computer. So you're getting the worst of both worlds, right? You're getting the worst of analog in the sense that you're kind of committing to stuff, and then you're getting the worst of the digital sonics, and all of that stuff is getting baked in. And I hear that so much when vocals show up to me, and it's just got this layer of distortion, this fake distortion. It's hard for me to work with that, if I'm trying to mix that into something like my normal tools for brightening things and making things sound natural and open or tight and compressed. Like, it starts to fall apart if there's a lot of layers already on there. So I think it's a personal question. As a mixer, I like to have just something clean that I can start with from scratch. And also, if you're going to go deep into effects, like, give me that option, right? So give me the clean, give me your crazy process track, and then I'll either try and recreate that, or if the process track is in good shape, then I can work with that. But it's not very often that process track, like that stereo vocal track, stereo vocal stem, is something that I enjoy working with. you know?
It used to be, in my mind, and you speak on this, but it used to be that there were kind of two tiers of vocals, that you'd get a well-recorded vocal that had some EQ and compression, or you'd get a raw vocal. And I was like, I always like a well-recorded vocal. But now it seems like there's a third worst tier where people are just processing like crazy. And I actually don't ever really know what it's from. I don't know if it's from people over processing and committing to things in the box, or if it's just people using, you know, consumer grade mics and preamps and signal path. I mean, I kind of feel like it's bad mics a lot of the time when I get vocals that don't sound good, but I never really know, and I guess I don't really inquire, but I find that a lot more. I wonder what we as record making people who are talking on the internet can like impart on people. Maybe just more raw vocals, don't be so close to the mic. I mean, do you have like a thing where, other than just getting it super raw, in addition, do you have any other thoughts? What are you hearing?
Well, there's a lot of newer mics, and really affordable mics, which is great, right? You have these warm audio things and you know, like a Rode NT1, like you hear that, right? There's a specific sound. I can hear a sub $1,000 condenser mic like that. Like I can just tell right away, and it's something
weird high end, right?
It's the weird high end, and you know, for a long time it would be you know, these Chinese knockoff capsules, and you could hear that. And now it's like the capsules are being made everywhere, but they're still like, they just don't sound good. And I think that's us being spoiled a little bit by having had access to great microphones. You know, when you think about the canon of recorded music over the years, you know, like the U47s, the 67s, the 414s, the 87s, like these have been around for decades and decades, and lots of records have gotten made. An entire infrastructure of gear has been built around these microphones being the source, right? So this idea that you're going to take like an Audio Technica and put it through a fake sounding Neve and a fake sounding 1176, and somehow you're going to get the same vocal quality as like a vintage U87 actually into a Neve console, into a you know, an original UA compressor, it just falls apart. And so I think it's the microphone. I also think the quality of modern converters and preamps is very good. So I don't think that's the weak link, but I do think, and again, I don't want to call out UAD users, but there's something about that new workflow within the UAD ecosystem that people are leaning on, and I think they're overcommitting when they're recording, when it's like, why would you overcommit when you can just mess with it later and like have the option to roll it back? The idea of like printing with digital effects into a computer just seems like lunacy to me, personally.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And as someone who, you know, I don't really, actually, I have UAD stuff. I don't use any of the UAD plugins. I just have the Apollo. I think it's a quality product that the console gets a little frustrating here and there, but it is ubiquitous across the world. So every city I've been in, I can usually find a piece of UAD gear. The new X stuff is high quality preamps and converters, but I don't use any of the plugins. Mostly because I want to be able to open up. I just don't want to have to plug in the gear to open up my shit. Although I guess they've adjusted something. Anyway, I haven't completely looked into it.
Yeah, but, and I don't want to throw them under the bus because I think they're a net positive. I mean, Universal Audio have been an amazing company. The plugin suite are fantastic. I mean, they're really great sounding plugins. Even the interfaces, like having the Apollo be kind of the standard mid-level converter now is great. You know,
agree.
But I just think it's that one particular facet of the workflow that I think, unless you really know what you're doing, you're kind of, I don't know, shooting yourself in the foot a little bit by committing to that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's see. There were a few questions about buses. It seems like there's always questions about this. I don't know exactly why there's so many, but maybe it's something that I think people are confused, or at least curious how much the big mixers are treating individual tracks versus busing groups of drums or instruments or guitars and vocals and things like that versus the mix bus. Do you have a general philosophy on that? Have you changed over the years? I feel like I'm doing more busing now overall than I used to, with like, here's a vocal bus, here's a drum bus, not doing lots of processing on it, but generally
Mm-hmm.
like getting my mix, running things through a few buses, and then making little tweaks. Maybe I'll do a little overall compression on the vocal bus, or a little bit of, something like a Spectre, just to get a little crunch in the mid range, or a little Oxford inflator, or one of those things, but generally not doing a ton to the individual buses. Well,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts these days on that?
I mean, I love buses. I think, especially in the era of 100 plus track counts, I think as a mixer, right, when you're kind of going into a song in the morning and you've got, okay, you have to mix a song in a day and you've got 150 tracks. Busing is just like, it's kind of the only way to stay sane with a lot of this stuff. And it's also, as mixing is evolving, and you and John have talked about this, and we've talked about this before, where a lot of the times I'm doing a little bit more like production-y stuff in the mix, as
You're
opposed to
getting
like,
under snare mics, and you're getting,
yeah, but a lot of times, you know, we're just getting a lot of stuff, and I think it makes a lot of sense where things are kind of more cooked coming to me, like the vocals, and there's several layers of vocals and there's stacks. Like, it makes sense to just be like, okay, all the lead vocals into one bus, and then I can kind of have similar treatment. It makes automation easier. It also just makes, dealing with it down the line easier. Inevitably as a mix engineer, you're going to be on the hook for stems. And so I put a lot of work into my template now, where it's like, it's really hierarchical, but it's and it looks a little bit over the top, and like 10 years ago I would have been like, this looks like a nightmare, but it makes it very, very quickly or very, very quick to do stems at the end. But it's also kind of nice because I'll get 75% through the mix, and now with Pro Tools, those buses can be folders now, which is really nice. And just visually collapsing all of your buses and then just having like 12 tracks, whether it's your drums, your bass, your percussion, your vocals, and doing your final tweaks on that is so much more refreshing. And I find myself really actually listening to kind of the final touches of the mix, as opposed to just like that endless scrolling of like, what are you looking for? I've really been enjoying that. And I feel like my mixes have gotten a lot more detailed towards the end about it, because it's so easy to be like, fuck, I'm going to do a fun filter thing, or a last minute delay throw or something like that. And it's a lot easier to kind of wrap your head around that if you're just looking at like very limited things. So busing for me is huge. And I do, even outside of that, I've always been a big drum bus guy. I mean, my drum setup is drum tracks. They go into one sub bus. That sub bus gets multed into 3 different buses. I've got uncompressed, I've got compressed, I've got distortion. Sometimes I'll add a second compression thing. Very rarely am I compressing individual drum elements. I like to compress drums as treat them as an instrument. It always just sounds better to me. Works better with my gating structure. Then that all goes to a drum bus, and then fuck it. At some point I might send that out to another bus. Like, why not? Bob's your uncle. It's Pro Tools. You can do anything.
How much in your drum bus generally are you, like, what percent of each of the various buses of compression and distortion versus raw are you kind of relying on? Is it like you get your mix on the uncompressed bus and maybe there's a little bit of zhuzh on it, and then you kind of mix in and blend in compression, blend in distortion, or how do you do that?
Yeah, you kind of build the house, right? And I know that there's a lot of good knowledge and advice now to kind of mix with everything in, and I think people are averse to soloing and stuff like that, and I think there's some there, but for me, like, my sensibilities, especially being a drummer, working on mostly kind of indie rock music, like, there's just like fundamentals where you have to get something to sound right. So it's always like, it's literally just starting with the kick drum usually, and it's just kind of working on phase. Like, I'm checking all of the various kick mics with the various overheads. What am I dealing with? Was this well recorded? Was it not recorded? Like, okay, if it was well recorded, then cool. I can kind of start to open things up, be less reliant on gates. So all of that is happening uncompressed, right? And it's just kind of getting a balance of the kit that just sounds right. Because if if it doesn't feel like a drum set to me, then all of my other decisions after that are just going to be, I don't know, getting second guessed. They're just going to be more challenging. And so, yeah, uncompressed. And then you can have fun, right? Once you've got the kit sounding like a drum set, and everything's in phase and in balance, then I'll start trying different compressors in parallel. And the blend will really depend on the aesthetic of the song. I mean, some rock music, you just need a lot of compression, you know, and that's like stereo distressors. Sometimes, you know, maybe like a Neve compressor or 1176 or something like that. And then distortion, inevitably, just to kind of keep something more contemporary. If you're using a real drum set in a modern context, you're going to have to compete with samples. And so you just need every trick in the book to kind of get that drum set to pop out of the speakers. So compression, distortion, and the buses just kind of help you try stuff very quickly. Because if you were kind of relying on, I'm only going to compress my mono overhead, or I'm only going to add distortion to this particular mic, it's a lot harder to audition stuff and kind of try things quickly to get to, you know, something that sounds exciting so you can move on to the next element.
It seems like, yet again, templates and preparation are hugely, hugely important. I feel like that's always, I always have room to grow as someone who's sometimes mixing, sometimes writing, producing, doing different genres, all that. I feel like I always kind of go like, oh, I really wish I had 9 different templates for every role, and I never quite get them all the way I want. But it seems like templates are a hugely important part of a mixer's workflow.
Definitely as a mixer. And the nice thing is, even when I go into production, right? Like if I'm doing something with Annie and having that, my mix template is, it's kind of gotten fine tuned, but there's a lot of it is just having verbs and delays kind of ready to go, you know, and certain settings that I like, like I have a couple of Sans Amp buses for the drums. I have a snare slap that I like. And it's also not just in mixing, because a lot of times, you know, if I'm making a record and I'm in the studio and the expectation is like, hey, these things need to sound like a record sooner rather than later, then I'll just pull stuff in from my mix template. And like, not only is it like stuff that I'm very, very familiar with, and I can get stuff fast, but it just sounds good. Like it's past the test of hundreds of mixes, right? So this is like, cool, I'm going to get results with this, you know?
I remember that from one of the discussions with Baines of his tracking template, which I would just assume is like, oh, it's pretty simple. You've got your vocal tracks and some BBs and some buses, and you got your tune ready and your headphone sends and whatever. But he also had several tracks with different distortion and delay times and whatever. Just when they start doing ad libs, it's like, here's an ad lib, let's try it on this. What does that throw sound like with that EQ and distort? What does that sound? I was like, oh yeah, I should do more prepping. I should do more prepping for everything.
Yeah.
It's so great in the room to just have something that sounds finished, that sounds cool, that sounds right, where you don't have to go like, let me set up a track and then I'm going to put in the delay and then let me figure out which distortion it, like, just, you have all that shit already set up.
Yeah. And it can be a little bit of a slippery slope in production, because I think there's part of going into a studio, and especially if it's a studio that you're not fully familiar with, like you should allocate yourself some time to experiment with things, to try the things that are at that studio that you might not normally work with. You know, you don't always just rely on your own tools, because I think if you're just going to be using the same sounds all the time in the same template, then you're going to kind of get pigeonholed into that. So you want to find that balance of efficiency, but then also like leaving room for creativity outside of your normal orbit, you know, like try that compressor, try that guitar pedal or something like that, you know?
Yeah, no, that's definitely correct. There were some questions, there were 2 different questions about bass guitar. I know you've talked about this on the Discord. We've had some good discussions on there. I feel like live bass guitar is always the toughest instrument to mix, because nobody knows how to play live bass guitar except for really good bass players, at least coming from like punk rock world, where it's just like the bass player, as I was several times in bands, like the third best guitar player. And therefore you just play like everything's just
playing root notes.
Yeah, attacks are different, low end's different. Do you have strategies on live bass guitar that you can share? I know you've talked about it a little on the Discord, but I just
yeah, I mean, do your best. I mean, bass is hard, right? You know, it's like
so hard.
there's a lot of like even when you get a perfectly played bass guitar from a super seasoned professional, like you still have to deal with the sonics of the bass, which is like kind of sitting in that weird zone between drums, guitars, keys, and it's kind of stepping on everything, right? So it's just tough, and it's so arrangement specific. Is someone down low on the neck? Are they playing up? Is the bass meant to be this real kind of melodic presence? Are they playing it like a melodic instrument, or is it just foundational? So kind of going in, listening to the bass, be like, okay, this is just some homie trucking root notes, and like it sounds like a fucking bass guitar plugged in DI. Like I'm not going to feature that in the mix. I'm just going to get it to be the foundation of the song that it needs to be. And so, but normally it's like with bass, it needs a lot of compression. That's one of the few instruments that's like pretty much always going to get compressed for me. It's not something that I think you can get away with like just distorting or just saturating. Like you unless you're going to go through and spend the time and do clip gain, which I think you could do. I've never done that. I've never gone through and like clip gained every note so it's like exactly the same volume and all that stuff. I've clip gained groups of things so they hit compressors a certain way, but I think compression is your friend in this. Like it's the same with like a lead vocal. Like there's kind of two things that are always going to have compression, and those are it: bass guitar and vocal.
I like what you said too about always important to think about a bass guitar not as an instrument that functions one way in a song. There are bass guitars that act as, Paul McCartney melodic, James Jamerson melodic, really important melodic elements. Sometimes they hold down subby low end. Sometimes I've actually, in some of the stuff I've been making with this one kind of hyper pop leaning artist, the bass guitar is functions for the low end in the verse, and then there's 808s that come in the chorus, and I high pass it, and it becomes almost like the sound of another guitar, but because it's a single note, it sticks in that kind of upper mid range and then into like the telephone 2 to 3K range where it just has like an extra little crunchiness, but it literally has no low end. So I have to listen to, when I'm listening from verse to chorus, sometimes I'll listen to the drums and the bass, so that when the chorus comes in and the low end from this instrument, from the main bass, goes away and the 808s supplement it, like how do those blend? Bass guitar can be like kind of like we've talked about with guitar in the past. Guitar is an instrument that almost can function like a sample now. Like all these things can exist in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, and modern production has made it harder. Like I had to mix a record a week or two ago, and it was just like 808s, drum set, bass, and high jangly guitar, and that was like the arrangement. So like dealing with like subby low end kick drum and 808 as like the low end foundation, trying to shoehorn in a bass guitar that's in the same register. Like a lot of this is arrangement stuff, right? And if you get the arrangement right, and if you kind of minimize those factors, then like you probably don't have to do a whole lot. Like, you listen to those old Motown records, and like it's like one drum mic, one bass mic, one guitar mic, and like everything is just in its perfect place. And I don't think they were thinking about compression or any of that shit. It was just like, well, there's the bass, you can hear it.
Yeah, they were just good at us. I think I may have told the story on the live. I definitely talked about it on the Discord a little bit and shared the one email exchange. But on the Keith Urban song I did a few years ago, he had Pino Palladino play bass on it. He's just like, I want some live bass. I'm gonna have Pino do it. And Pino sent me this track. It was a fairly simple part, but I literally pulled the stem into the session, and without even adjusting the volume, it was perfect. It just sat perfectly. The EQ was perfect. The compression was just right. And so, of course, I immediately hit him up and said, thank you so much. This sounds amazing. It's perfect. Just out of curiosity, what was your chain? Thinking I'm going to get something magical. And he goes, P bass into my Apollo.
Yeah. And he's just listening, and he's playing the right notes. And he's probably like playing a certain, like that's just, Pino's a G for sure.
Yeah, Pino's maybe the best alive.
But also, it kind of speaks to a different point, right? Where it's like now modern music production, a lot of people are wearing a lot of hats, right? Or a few people are wearing a lot of hats, and I think it harkens back to this era of like Pino Palladino is a fucking bass player and he's a great one. And there's a reason he gets hired. And a lot of times, like, you can't afford Pino. You can't afford to hire the best drummer. But man, the value when you get someone who comes into the studio who is just focused on their instrument. You know, I've been doing stuff with Annie lately, and her drummer, Mark Juliana, is just like a total beast of a drummer, like one of the best drummers I've ever worked with. A real, like, the drum set is an instrument for him, and you can give him effects and all of that stuff. And when you just have someone that has a command over their instrument like that, down to the tone of the particular drums, or whether it's bass or guitar player comes in, they've got their effects sorted, they've got their amps sorted. Like, when they're like self-sufficient like that, and they can kind of make decisions for you as they're performing, there's a real magic to that. That's just few and far between these days, because records are just made differently, you know. And so that's the real magic. So like with that Pino moment, it's like, man, yeah, that's the dream. Just get a mono bass file from Pino, and it's just like at Unity, and you're good.
It was ridiculous. Well, and back to the very beginning of the conversation too, I think probably a big part of, or at least a not insignificant part of your collaborations with Annie is being someone who can do a lot of different things. I mean, the fact that some of the songs on this Grammy-winning album that you are the mixer of, that you will get the credit as the mixer, were you jamming with her because you can play drums, and you can wear a lot of hats in the studio, as we've talked about. I'm especially for people early in their career, although I've made my whole career on it, as some people have specialized and I have not in the same way. I think trying a bit of everything is a really important thing, because you just don't know where it's going to lead. I mean, the fact that you are a drummer, when's the last time you played in a band as a drummer and in a consistent way? It's probably been a couple of decades. But just the fact that you have that skill set, even as someone who's there to engineer, just provides you with more. I mean, that's the genesis of a Grammy-winning album, really. I mean, not to give you all the credit or something, but just the fact that you can be there and be involved with the artist, I think is hugely important.
And I think, to further that a little bit more, like having experience on all the instruments, if you're going to be a music producer or a songwriter or something, like having just a basic vocabulary to be able to communicate with the other people that are playing is huge. I see that a lot in kind of younger engineers, younger producers, where like they don't really understand the guitar. They don't really understand a drum set. And it's very hard for them to articulate things, where if they're like trying to give direction or whatever, whereas like if you can sit down and play at a Wurlitzer and be like, actually, can we go down a register, and I know that like if you hit a key on a whirly a little bit harder, it's gonna like distort a little bit, like let's do more of that, stuff like that, and you just get that knowledge from sitting down and spending time with that instrument, trying to learn it.
Yeah, it's certainly not necessary to make records, but it does give you a leg up, because there are so many people who, and again, a beautiful thing, who can grab a little Apollo interface and a cheap mic and make records, which is amazing. But if you are someone who is trying to be a professional, or are a professional and just trying to continue your career, being able to do a diversity of things, it's crazy how much that stuff comes up. I mean, I remember I played guitar for a friend of mine. He was just like, "You play guitar?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's just like, "Can I send you something to play on?" Sure. Maybe it ends up on a thing, maybe it doesn't, but just being able to have a range of skills has certainly served me very well.
Yep.
And obviously worked out well for you on this album. Let's see. There were a few undertone audio related questions, and I figured you and I could nerd out on that. By the way, did you connect with Circuit? I know he had some questions about Fairchild stuff.
I haven't. I got your text. I haven't heard from him yet, so I'll reach back out.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have questions about Fairchild's, some of the UTA stuff. I actually don't know what the status is of what they're making these days. I know there's that new guitar box, that the Unity Gain reamp thing, which is probably a little bit niche for a lot of people, but those that use it, I think it's probably the best thing that would ever be made for that. But in terms of either the undertone preamps, the EQ, the Fairchild, you want to just riff on that? What of that stuff do you use? You have like an older version of the Fairchild, or what?
Yeah,
what are you using?
I use it all. You can kind of see my little rack over here. So I have a original Unfairchild. So this was kind of the first batch. I want to say of like 10. It looks like the version 2, but it was designed with a different tube set. And originally, when Undertone Audio started building the Unfairchild, the 6386 tube, which is the original Very Mu tube that was used in the original Fairchild, was not being manufactured, and you couldn't find them anywhere. They're really hard to find, really expensive. And so Garen, our friend Garen, you remember?
Shout out Garen.
He designed the original circuit to be 6BC8, which is a different type of Very Mu tube. It's the one that's found in like the UA175B, a couple other Very Mu compressors. And it's sonically, it's just a little more aggressive. And it tends to distort a little bit easier. And in the original Unfairchild, there was a magic in that, right? Where it was like, it was just intense. It was just a heavy-handed compressor. And then you could use it feed forward or feed backward. There were a couple different modes where you can kind of get different sonic goodness out of it. And then inevitably, those tubes became really hard to find. And then nobody was making those tubes. And I think there was a point where Eric and Undertone bought like the last of the new old stock that they could find. You know, there were just thousands of tubes in the building that they were going through and testing. And most of them were garbage. They had to throw them away.
Really?
And then inevitably, I think J started making the original 6386 tube again to probably service all of the new Very Mu compressors that were coming out. And so then they modified that design to kind of be back closer to the original Fairchild. And that's what the modern thing is using today. And those tubes, I mean, you know, there's 8 of them and each one is like $100. You know, so like it's just the tubes in that box alone are expensive. But that being said, mine is great. It's very different. I don't really use it as compressor. It basically lives on my mix bus and just adds subtle distortion, harmonic saturation. It's got a pretty gnarly EQ curve that I mix into from the get-go, which is kind of fun. It's got this huge mid-range lift, and I find that it adds a cool mid-range presence that I wouldn't normally add in on individual stuff.
Where does that sit?
I mean, it's literally almost at like, it's like a 1 dB lift around like 1.5, and the Q is just like essentially full spectrum. Like the width goes down to like 100 up to like 10K. And then that goes into a set of undertone EQs, in which I have a pretty drastic high shelf going. I mean, we're talking like 4 or 5 dB up at like 11 or 12K. And it's that weird shape where there's the high shelf, but there's a little bit of a dip in the high mid range, like from 3 to 5K. So it's dipping
right,
there.
So it's not just shelving up; it's doing this like down and then
exactly.
Up. Or maybe
And
it's
it's kind of this, it's kind of this thing that I stumbled across where I did a couple mixes with it, and before I shot it and like actually saw what the curve was, and it was just like, man, this is really cool, and it just got me closer on mixes a lot faster. And then when I shot it, I was like, wow, this is wild. Am I really mixing into this for all of this stuff? But it sounded good. So I've never been like a huge analog mix bus chain guy until this year, until I've settled into this room. And like, obviously I'm doing all my mixing here now. So it's a little easier to have like a static mix bus. But it's been great. And it's definitely like taken my mixes up another notch.
And how much, I know, I'm sure there's a measurement for it, but maybe just subjectively, how much harmonic distortion do you think is being added by the Unfairchild?
Very, very little. And it's funny because there was somebody on the Discord, and apologies for not remembering, but when I shared the curve with everyone, and someone actually went in and made a Pro Q3 curve that mimicked my mix bus. So I actually ended up using that and downloading it. And now it's like when I run stems, I'll do that so I can bounce offline, because it sounds like A/B, it's pretty fucking close. And then the one thing that I couldn't do in Pro Q was the saturation. So I basically used the Saturn plugin from FabFilter and try to recreate through having a graph and seeing what the overtone scale was. Just went through the presets and just got something that matched as close as possible. And it was like a very, very small amount. But granted, it's on your mix bus, so it's not like, you know, you're not adding a lot of distortion, but it was enough to be like, okay, you start to see the resonances in the harmonic scale. And so now I have this like Saturn Pro Q3 setup where if I had to in a pinch, I could definitely go on a laptop and print mixes, and it would sound pretty much the same, which is kind of nice.
Interesting. Well, also, yet again, shout out to the Discord for the people that are not on it. You can be stealing the Grammy-winning secrets of mix engineer Cian Riordan.
Put it all up there. Yeah. I mean,
we'll put it up there. Put it up there again. That's really interesting. And do you? I mean, you're not doing a lot of recording in that room, so I imagine you're not using the preamps. But I assume you've used them in the past. That's what I use for my main vocal chain. Well, not now because I'm on the road, but that was mine was like I think it was just the undertone pre with both the transformers on, with a little bit of high end boost. Again, just a little bit of that shelf. And then through my, I think, revision F1176, just adding a little bit of harmonic color in there. But have you recorded a lot through those as well?
I mean, those preamps, yeah. I mean, I think of the modern era of preamps, they're kind of the new gold standard. And I think they're so flexible, you know, people who haven't used the undertone pre's, whether it's on the MPEQ or the MPDI4 or whatever the 4 channel is called, there's a lot of options with transformers. And so you can go from very, very colored, even distorted, to extremely clean, class A, transformerless, and everything in between. So I just think like my two favorite preamps are wildly different. There's the undertone, which, you know, does a lot. It can be a little bit complicated, or the Ampex 351. Like, I think between those two, I can pretty much get any sound that I want. The Ampex is amazing because the distortion that comes from that, anyone that's used the decapitator in the A setting, that is that distortion that they're trying to mimic. And so it's an old tube mic pre that, you know, used to be attached to a 351 tape machine, and there's just like an endless amount of gain. So it can be super, super clean, really thick kind of tube sounding, to full on distorted, and the distortion that you get from it is just incredibly musical. And it's just the best. So those are my like desert island mic pre's.
That's awesome. Let's do one more question. We can jam it in here if we go over a little bit. It's okay on my end. A couple of people asked about revisions. There's one question on the Discord. Would love to hear some revision stock. How do you manage revisions and versions? How do you collect notes and send versions? Do you send email, text? Like, do you have a dedicated platform where you transfer things to avoid? Like, can you maybe just riff on that a little bit? I mean, there's a lot of ways to talk about this, but you kind of have a philosophy on this, and I'd be curious to get it out.
Yeah, I think revisions are, you know, they come to you. You know, some people are organized, you know, whether you're working with a team, and they'll kind of compile notes. You get a nice email. That's always my preference. A lot of times you're just fielding text messages from various members of the group or whatever, and it's kind of on you to compile. So I just have a notes app where, you know, I can anticipate, okay, I just sent on a mix, revisions are going to come in. I just start to like pile them into this note thing. And then I can also add my own notes because I'll be in the car or on AirPods listening, and just have them centralized. So then when I go to do revisions, there's an actionable list, and I'm going through, and I make a point, every revision that I do, it gets like a signifier for me, whether even if I just say done, like if someone says, hey, can you turn up the vocals in the chorus? I can say done, and I'll try and be like, I turned it up like 2 dB or something like that. But a lot of times revisions are like interpretive, right? So people will be like, there's something weird about this, or I'm not feeling this. And that's a chance for me to kind of put down what my thought process is and what I'm trying to do. So then when I do send the revision, send the mix, I'll copy that with my notes in bold. So there's an explanation of what I'm doing. And that might, you know, solve the problem. That's ideal. Or it might be like, hey, I see that you tried to do this. I don't think it needs to be that heavy-handed. Like, you're just communicating, right? You're giving them tools to give you further feedback, and there's transparency to the process. It's always weird to me when you get a revision back and it's just a file and you're just like, well, what did you do? Like, did you fix everything? Did you fix some stuff? And I like to just be open about it, communicative, and just be like, this is exactly what I did. And if you don't like any of it, then we can, and it also helps me work my way back too, right? So if I can go back and look at those notes and be like, well, I turned the vocals up 2 dB, let's split the difference. I can come down 1 instead of just like trying to wing it on the next one, you know? So that's my process. It's just try to document as best as possible and just try to communicate as best as you can.
I try to say early in the process, it would be helpful if you guys could accumulate all the notes together and send them to me. And that actually ends up, because inevitably in a process, there are disagreements in what people want to hear. Sometimes that means I'll do 2 versions. Sometimes it means, you know, I have to give an opinion at the end. But oftentimes if you say, hey, give me 1 set of notes, whoever's collecting the notes or people will be copied on the email or whatever it is, and they'll see contradictory things and they'll end up working them out between them, or they'll want to hear 2 versions. I generally that's the reason to collect notes more than anything else for me, is so that when people are giving contradictory things, they at least see it. So they're not expecting, you know, opposing things from me. I mean, I guess my answer to the question of how do I send it, I just send it based on, sometimes I'll text it to people, sometimes I'll WhatsApp, sometimes we transfer with an MP3 and a WAV file. Mixes? Yeah, it depends on the artist for me and what they want to hear.
Yeah, I try to, just for my own, just because I'm sending different things, I like to have everything just kind of centralized and organized. So everyone gets a Dropbox link. And then an email corresponding. So the email title's like song, revision number, hey, here's a link, here's my notes, and then they can respond to that. Or it's also easy for me to search them if I need to search my email or something like that. But Dropbox is great because I don't like including an attachment, because sometimes I'll send something and I'll be like, oh shit, that's fucked up. You know, like I might have like not been in the room when it was printing or something like that, and inevitably that happens. We all make mistakes, and I like being able to pull down the file. I like the file. Obviously, anyone that gets a Dropbox link can download it, but I like having that last minute option to be like, no, don't listen to that, because especially like a version 1, you know, that's the most important mix you send out, right? And I think that first impression means a lot. And if, you know, I used to have this stupid gain staging thing where I'd have like a 10 dB drop at the end so I could meter in VU. And then when I would send the mix, I would have to turn off that 10 dB trim so it'd be super loud. But like 1 time out of 5, I'd be like leaving that thing on and they'd get a limited ref that's 10 dB quieter or 12 dB quieter. And you're just like, no, like that can't be the first thing they hear.
I've definitely done essentially exactly the same thing.
Yes.
See if there's one other question on that. Off the top of your head, any things to avoid? I mean, other than not giving them a 10 dB quieter mix on the first one. I like the idea of really making sure that first mix is right, because that's the first impression. Save as versions constantly.
Always save as. Yeah, I mean, live and die by the save as. If you're going to try something, save as. Just have a way to get back to something. And I think, on the first mix, I mean, I think too, like, you know, it's okay to introduce it a little bit, you know, like it kind of explain your thought. Like I like to like get people pumped about like, hey, I like your song, you know, like start like be human a bit. You can't, you know, like anything you can do to connect with them, to be like, hey, I'm excited about working on your music. Here's what I did. Like I noticed that the drums weren't really kind of doing their job in the rough mix. I like the direction with this. So this is kind of how I approach things. If you don't like it, great, let's figure it out. But at least there's context there, and they can listen and be like, wow, he really did a number on those drums or those vocals or something like that. And just to know that like it's a conversation. I don't want someone to be apprehensive about giving me feedback. You know, I want to come in being like, this is a service industry. Like I'm here to help you make your music you know, as good as possible. And like it's going to take both of us to do that. So here I am, like I'm on the team, you know. Hi.
Absolutely. That's really great advice. The people often forget, especially when starting out, that especially if you're a mix engineer, you're coming on at the end of a process where there's been lots of stresses, lots of decisions, lots of opinions, lots of collaboration, and you're coming in at the very end. So to come in and just say, "Hey, I'm here to help,"
Yeah.
that's a really important thing.
Yeah. I think people are just so used to like just having the ego come in gunning, and just anything you can do to kind of disarm that, I think is going to work in your favor, especially if you're going into a record and if it's a challenging situation, you know, like you might be up shit's creek with like bad productions or bad engineering. And it's like, man, it's going to take a while to get there. So like at least having the interpersonal side taken care of is going to buy you a lot of, a lot of flex and just getting the project over the line.
Cian, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Congratulations again on your Grammy win. It is well deserved. I've been telling people for the last couple of years that you are the most underrated mix engineer and record maker in the music industry, and I think people are starting to figure it out. It's a pleasure to know you. I love you, and that's a great record you made. And congratulations on the success, man.
Thanks, Matt. It means a lot coming from you, bud.
We're gonna go jump on the Discord and talk some shit after this.
All right. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
I'll see you. Safe travels.
Bye-bye.